Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining for our third day of Suburban Action Week. So today we've got Amy Rynell, the Executive Director of the Active Transportation Alliance, and Dave Simmons, the Executive Director of Ride Illinois, joining for a coffee talk. So hopefully you have your coffee or your tea this morning. And I am Maggie Sherwinski, an advocacy manager at the Active Transportation Alliance. And before we get started, I have a few questions for them, which we'll have them discuss some things. And then if anyone has any questions for Amy and Dave, please add those to the chat while they're talking, and then we'll get to the questions after those initial set of questions. And also one other thing you might want to do here, I'm going to stop sharing this screen so you can see each other. But you might want to switch to speaker view so you can see Dave and Amy a little larger on your screen when they're talking. And then you're also afterwards, you're welcome to unmute yourself and have a conversation with Amy and Dave also. Let's get started. So question for both of you is, just as you're both newish directors of an active transportation organization. And so during the pandemic, how are you spending your time? Are you able to do anything active? And especially now with all this snow. So Dave, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I'm pretty stubborn. So I've been getting out for bike rides or runs or, running some errands. So that's part of my mental and physical health. So staying busy.
And maybe a little shoveling.
A little bit of shoveling. Yeah, there you go.
I'll start with a little truth-telling moment, which before I started at Active Transportation Alliance, I had framed our famed Chicagoland bike map, and I have it hanging on the wall. And I've always been really struck by the diversity and coverage of the trails and paths on street in the forest preserves that we have across the region. So I've been slowly working my way through them and highlighting as I hit every path and trail. During the pandemic, I think my radius has been a little more limited, although in the summer I did go farther out into the Aurora, Elgin. I love that path along the river. But I've stayed a little closer to home. I can bike to a couple of forest preserve paths that are gems: Salt Creek Trail, Des Plaines River Trail, Prairie Path. I've done a little actual bike camping using the Prairie Path to get out to a forest preserve in DuPage. So kind of just adventuring more than what I usually do, which is commuting. So I've just, enjoyed that. I've also enjoyed hiking those places that I've always biked and seeing them differently, which when you slow it down, you really do experience it differently. So it's like being in a different place, which is kind of fun. But truth be told, the thing I most miss is transit. I love transit. I just love it. I have the system maps permanent in my head. I don't need a map on the wall with those. I can hear the train from my house and it makes me smile. So I'm most looking forward actually to getting back on buses and trains.
So okay, since you were so you painted such a wonderful picture, I'm gonna add to mine if that's okay.
Sure.
So one of the things I've enjoyed, and I was thinking more recently, but since the pandemic's a year on now, is just biking to different communities. So I live out in Elk Grove Village, and the way I like to ride is just kind of, I probably don't pay enough attention to what's ahead of me. I'm always looking around. So, kind of like Amy and her quest to hit some of these different trails and preserves and whatnot, I'm kind of doing the same thing with different communities and just kind of taking it all in. I even go down dead end streets just to say, like, I've been down that street.
So I guess this is part of why we're at these jobs.
Yes.
Right.
Are either of you cross-country skiing or snowshoeing? I've been hearing a lot of advocates have been doing that.
Snowshoeing is so fun. In fact, my son snowshoed through our neighborhood yesterday. It's just really cool. It's good exercise and it's faster than walking.
I have not. No, I haven't.
I know, I want to go get cross-country skis now. It sounds fun.
As soon as you buy them, like all the snow's gonna
Yeah,
melt.
I know, exactly.
Mhm.
Well, so what can you tell us, both of you, about how did you end up in your current role as executive director of Ride Illinois and Active Trans, and like, what were you doing before? When did you become the executive director? What motivated you to take this leadership role? So Dave, let's start with you.
Yeah, so before this role, I was working in educational publishing and assessment, and including a stint at Rand McNally making maps. So I am definitely kind of a proponent or the result of just like following the opportunities that present themselves. So I did that for 25 years, but during that time, actually back in 2009, I became a league cycling instructor. And I remember many of the folks on the call. I see some other LCIs and folks who know Larry Mize. Afterwards, after the class I took from Larry, I went up to him and said, how do you get to the, like, where you can teach these classes? And so Larry hooked me into that program, which had a very strong educational foundation and focus. And that led to a committee with, I think it was Active Trans, might have been Chicago Bike Federation still, an education committee. And through that, I met Bob Hull, who's actually on both of our boards. And like just I don't know, the skies parted, and it's like, wow, I really, like, I get this, I appreciate it. I want to know more and do more. Eventually helped form a local organization in Elk Grove Village, our Friends of Cycling in Elk Grove, which still involved with, and it's focused on advocacy. It's not a bike club per se. And then through that, and working with Ride Illinois and Active Trans, and really anyone who would listen to me, just got to know a lot of people. And then when Ed Barsati, our former executive director, decided he wanted to step back after 20 years, it was definitely one of those, like, angel devil things if you picture the old cartoons, like, yes, you should do it. No, you shouldn't. And I went back and forth a few days and said, hey, I'll throw my name in the hat and see what happens. And so that was summer of 2019. And then I was hired and started in October of 2019. So kind of it's a passion job, right? It's something that I knew that I really wanted to get involved in. And I had told myself with the little angel devil, conversation, which was just with myself, by the way, that, I know 10 more years of like the corporate 9 to 5, and then you can do it. And finally decided, really, why wait? And yeah, fortunately, I was chosen and have absolutely no regrets. So.
Great. And Gina Kenny in the chat says that they are thrilled that you're executive director of Ride Illinois.
My plant, yes.
Amy, what about you?
I also had a long career in social change at Heartland Alliance. And so there I led really large scale and significant economic and social justice policy initiatives, spanning poverty, unemployment, housing instability, health, criminal justice. And through that work, I'm a systems thinker, I'm a root cause thinker. And through that work, I repeatedly saw the role that transportation played in access to basic needs, quality of life, stability, and those insights, plus my love of active forms of getting around. If I could live outside, I would, led me to Active Trans. I was making very intentional career change, and I'm very mission driven. I need to be at a place that I believe in what I'm doing every minute of the day, even when it's tedious. And so Active Trans is one of those places that was on the list. So I'm really committed to transforming our region's sustainable transportation landscape in ways that do create more equitable, thriving communities. I really believe in what we do. And my strength lies in thinking big. And so I think unlocking the power of what we've been building across our organizations through advocacy and interest groups and other things, I think we can really transform our landscape in Illinois through policy change. It's a long game. There's not a lot of daily reward in that, but I've done it many times and just see a lot of promise in that. So I think we have to get a lot of the barriers removed to seeing cycling and walking and transit as much more central to what we do. So it felt very aligned. I'm excited to be here. I did start during COVID, so it's been a unique transition to not commuting to work at a job that's really about actively transporting yourself. So hopefully soon we'll be back together.
Yeah, and you, Amy, you've done a really amazing job leading our organization despite starting during the pandemic and meeting a lot of us over Zoom for the first time. Mm-hmm. So it's a challenging position to be in, but I feel lucky that we have you. Lucky that we have Dave too as our Ride Illinois leader. So I feel like we're in good hands.
It's a strong community of people, yeah. For sure.
How do Active Trans and Ride Illinois work together? Do you have, can you share, should residents, advocates get involved in both organizations, or, and Amy, let's start with you.
Yeah, so Dave and I, it's increasingly almost every week we're in a meeting together. So we're very, very collaborative. And I know Maggie for our walk bike every town, Dave's a really important partner. So I think, we're working hand in hand on so many things and leaning into our strengths. So I would say, Dave, that you all are really strong on education and building a statewide reach and movement. And we're, we have more of a policy and lobbying infrastructure. And so building, supporting each other's capabilities there so we can work together and bring our strengths to the table has been really fun. And, I think later today, there's a call that we're doing with Ride Illinois and some of their leaders on some state legislation we want to do to help get much more money flowing into pedestrian and biking infrastructure from the state. So it's just so exciting, I think, to just bring our missions to life in ways that, independently, it's so much harder to do. We need a lot of people working on these things, not just one organization or one person. So I think there's probably a lot more to say. A lot of our policy victories have been done together, or they complement one another. So I don't know, Dave, you could probably fill this out a little more since you've got a year ahead of me in the organization.
Only about 6 months, but
6 months, okay.
Yeah, and when you said compliment, I think that's a great way to describe how we work together, because I've had many conversations say, well, Active Trans is Chicagoland, Ride Illinois is statewide, but you also are involved with biking in transit, which I know transit has taken up a lot of your time recently. But there are plenty of things that we collaborate on that are independent of the geography of the state. I think the fact that Amy, you and I started at a kind of the similar time in chaos, right? When it came to COVID, right? Societal chaos and then organizational chaos on, fundraising and all those kind of things that, maybe it was a bit fortuitous that and kind of meant to be. The fact that Active Trans, when it comes to specifically biking, really pushes for the infrastructure and, in that, especially in the city, a lot of it is for transportation. And the fact that I do, as much as I can biking for transportation, it's a different perspective. And so within Ride Illinois, I'm trying to kind of, pivot or change that perspective a bit that, it's a challenge across the country, right? Bikes are not toys. It's practical, sustainable transportation. That fits in really well with what Active Trans has been doing when it comes to biking. I see no lack of things that we can work on. I'm fortunate to work with, closely with Maggie, to have worked with you for many years in local issues. And so when we get to some of those bigger things like the legislation and the funding, it's new. It's certainly new to me. I'm fortunate to have Ed still with us. I'm excited to kind of learn that whole process and to go through it and to be hopefully be able to come back to our supporters and say, hey, together we are able to push this through, and that means, X many more dollars or safer roads because of legislation. As you mentioned, Amy, some of those are definitely long game, multi-year potentially initiatives, but I think the organizations working together, that really helps, because it also gives kind of perspective from, small town or maybe Southern Illinois all the way up to Chicago. So.
Great. Well, kind of on this topic, are there any salient projects, events, topics you'd like to share with those who are on the webinar today? Any priorities or visions for 2021 for Ride Illinois?
Yes, there's a couple things, and I'll be brief. Amy mentioned an education initiative, so we are in the midst of developing what we're calling the Ride Illinois Safely program. It's going to be a mix of online, and then when the time comes, in person classes and sessions, and we're going to tap into the League Cycling Instructor Network in Illinois. So that's exciting. And I say we have these conversations in the planning meetings, and I'll say it to you as well. Reserve judgment, support us along the way. There's going to be some hiccups, but we really want to have something that can be bigger than, a lot of the education right now takes place in the Chicagoland area. So that's one of the goals, is to reach out in other parts of the state. So that's exciting. We also have a new volunteer initiative, the regional action teams, and yes, RAT, that spells rat, but that's fun. We're going to stick with it. And so we're actually, just the last 2 evenings, had kickoff meetings. Actually, I should say the first meetings of first 2 of 4 regions. We broke the state up into 4 regions. And so we're building a volunteer crew that we've not had before. And so when it comes to things like legislation, making or improving relationships with IDOT, or specific projects like this one, section of a trail, it's an exciting initiative, because we're going to be hearing from these volunteers and working with them, kind of, as I say, a mutually beneficial relationship, right? So they'll get something out of it by maybe using their project management skills or social media or, public speaking, whatever it might be. So we're at the point now where really, it's kind of a brain dump as people share their ideas and thoughts. And then in the coming weeks and months, we'll start prioritizing and kind of pushing forward. I want to point out, back to your last question, because, Maggie, you have your Suburban, the bike walk initiative, right? And so I just want to point out that the intent is to work closely with Maggie and that initiative. You're going to see some of the same names. This is not by any means we want to do anything exclusive. We want to work together, maybe just another angle that can help push some things through. And then lastly, we have Ride Illinois community. We're trying to build a community around bikes, right? So whether you ride short or distance, recreation, transportation, we just want to, it's kind of a softer approach. Like, let's just be welcoming. And that's something that, again, kind of flipping the script from a kind of an insulated, or maybe an organization people don't know a lot about, to like, hey, here's who we are. You like to ride a bike, we want you part of our community. So,
Amy, how about you? Visions, priorities for 2021 or beyond?
For sure. It's a little hard to follow spreading the joy of cycling, which I think is really what you're talking about, Dave, because it is.
That's my soft approach.
It's really affirming. I'll just talk about a little bit on the public policy horizon. So one thing that impacts probably everybody on this call are state roads, and state roads are some of our most major streets in our communities, providing, those are the roads where we have our major retail corridors, service jobs, stores, some schools, some doctor offices, bus stops. So state roads are really important. They are also the most unsafe and unwelcoming to pedestrians and cyclists. And unfortunately, they house the things we need to get to. So we as we look at those roads and solutions on those roads, there's an important problem that I think is reflective of how we value walking and cycling, which is under current policy, the state funds 100% of those roads resurfacing. But if we are to add or fight for a bike lane and a path to walk on safely, the community where it's being built in has to pay 20% of the match to that. Whereas the road's 100% covered. And so we've just baked in an inequity there across modes of transportation, valuing the car over these other forms. And unfortunately, it is really unsafe to be on those roads, and people need to be on them. And I've been on them. I once for quite a while was in a place where I had to walk alongside a state road to get to and from the store. It's not okay. And so we're going to be working on legislation to fill those gaps in our bicycle network and our pedestrian networks by making it easier to get them paid for. We know our government, our levels of governments, the different ones are under different really hard economic pressure right now. But we don't see that same problem with road building. There's a lot of money there through our capital plans and other things. So both at the state level and within Chicago, looking at capital investments and going pretty hard at how that money is going to be spent in years to come, and trying to build in a way that it will always be invested in bikes and pedestrians as well. So that's a big one at the state level that stay tuned. We'll begin ramping up action around that soon. And then we're still fighting for transit. Our region's transit system is so important to many things. Obviously COVID has really, really hurt revenue. So we have an action alert right now with Congress. I'll actually paste it. Let me see if I have it. I think I can paste it into the chat if you want to take action to make sure that there's enough money going into transit. So I'll look for that in a second while Maggie.
Amy, I can try to find it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then, Dave kind of alluded to this, but COVID, the restrictions on the types of events that our organizations put on has put a lot of financial stress on us. And so to the extent that you're able and interested, join our organizations or support us in other ways so that we can remain strong and impactful while we don't have our usual sources of revenue. So just support, different types of support are deeply, deeply valued right now.
Well said. I'm not a salesman, so what Amy said.
And I just found the action alert, so I'm going to paste it in the chat. So anyone who can take action, we appreciate it, because it really, we found that it really makes a difference to have our suburban advocates taking action on these, because it touches a lot of different elected officials, and the more people who are aware of this, the better. And so please share that link. Please take action yourself. I guess so. One other last question that I have before we jump into the chat questions. I feel like the two of you share like a handful of qualities as leaders. Like, you're both very passionate, you're both very empathetic, and you're both you just care. You care a lot about others, and do you have, and you're both very wise. Like, you've had so much experience, and I feel like I'm always learning things from both of you. Do you have any just general advice for advocates in the suburbs for, pushing for better walking, biking, transit in their communities? And I'm surprising you with this question. I'm sorry.
No. Well, you maybe lifted us. I won't speak for Amy because she has lots of experience, but I appreciate the kind words, Maggie, and I too have learned a lot from you. I think the challenge for advocates and for people who share that passion, and I think it's human nature to want kind of immediate results, right? And so the challenge to advocates is it is a long game. You need to stay the course. There are going to be ups and downs, and by connecting with others who have similar mind, either within your community or in the region, or heck, even with technology downstate or out of state, that can help keep you kind of inspired. So when you have those kind of down days, or when you take a step back, there's folks there to lift you up. And looking at the list of names on this call, you know who you are. You've done just that for me. So have that support system that can keep you kind of focused on the long-term goal.
Yeah, for sure. Also, I think relationships really matter. And a lot of the people that we're advocating for who hold the policy or the purse strings they may spend their life in a car. We have to be honest with ourselves that, the majority of people in our region are pulling out of a garage into a garage. So they're not experiencing the roadway in the same way that we are. So I think building relationships in education is really important. One of the coolest things I did early in my career was related to a bus lane being cut, and it was in a downstate community, one of our, middle of the state, central Illinois, medium-sized cities, and they were going to cut a bus route that went past public housing to onto major job center. And a lot of people in public housing didn't have cars, and they worked at the major job center. And so we took members of that city council on the bus route that the folks in public housing were going to have to take to get to work. So it went from a 30-minute commute to something like a little over 2 hours. And they experienced it. And that really absolutely changed their mind. And I think in each of our communities with our local councils, I know they're all called different things, but we have an opportunity to educate in ways like that to make it more real. And hear their side of the story so that you understand where you're starting from. I think that's really important. Sometimes we lead with loudness and complaint, and that people stop listening immediately. And so just hearing where they're starting from can help us craft our approach to getting what we want. So it's doable, but it does require persistence. And with each election, it's a new round of new people. So I know a lot of our communities have elections right now. I don't know, Maggie, if you want to talk a little bit about that, but there are questions we can be asking those candidates to get them on record now in thinking about these issues differently. So maybe I'll put that back to you, Maggie.
Yeah, sure.
Question.
So in April, there are a lot of local elections, and we've had some advocacy groups in the past put together questionnaires for their elected officials or candidates running for office, just to get them on record on how do they feel about walking, biking, and transit, and will they commit to prioritizing making improvements, and that can make a big difference in getting them to really act if and when they are elected. So we have a election advocacy webinar that's really helpful, I think, that is worth watching, and that I like to send it out often, so I'll send it again. And we also have a questionnaire template that you're welcome to use, and you can tailor it to your community. And yeah, I think both of you gave a lot of great advice there, but yeah, tapping into your elected officials is something that can make a big difference.
Maggie, if I could, the National Bike Summit is coming up. So on a federal level, so today is the last day. I won't go too far into it, but today's the last day to register for the summit and be part of Lobby Day. So if it's something you wanted to, to be part of Lobby Day and speak probably with transportation staffers. Sorry, my cat says hello. Although some of the elected officials will be they're all Zoom meetings. I think bikeleague.org, you can find out about that. And it's pretty inexpensive because it's going to be virtual.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was the last day to register. So I'll email everyone who's.
Last day to register if you want to be part of it.
And it's, I think, $50. Is that correct?
It's $50 for an LAB member. But if anyone's interested in just the Lobby Day, which is March 3rd, we have a special code. You can just email me directly. at
Okay.
daysideillinois.org. They asked me to just widespread share the code, but
Yeah.
that is
Well,
an option.
Well, I'll email everyone with Dave's info if you don't already have it. And yeah, I get the more people that get involved in that, the better. So,
Yeah.
All right, well, let's move on to the chat questions. So we have, let's see, Ralph says, Dave, he's glad you listened to your shoulder angel. Ron asks, recognizing that building bike infrastructure like trails, paths, and protected bike lanes takes decades, what are the barriers to easier fixes like slow, safe streets and road diets? Why aren't those being pursued sooner rather than later?
I have maybe a quick answer, and Amy, obviously feel free to add. You know, once communities invest in some sort of planning, whether it's a bike ped plan or complete streets, that's kind of the first step. You need to have that foundation, because engineers aren't typically just going to choose to put in a slow street or do a road diet on a whim or based on an idea. So that's where local advocates working with their elected officials and staff in their municipalities really need to push for a plan. So when those opportunities come up, they can be addressed and they can be implemented. That is still slow, but it is something that is necessary. Amy, I don't know if you.
Yeah, and we have a survey out right now on slow streets and the experiences that communities had with it to garner some additional insights to tailor our next wave of advocacy around this. So stay tuned on that. I think there was so much good that came out of that. There was also a lot of, like in one year, there were people loving it, and the other year, people, including aldermen and others, who had to move the barricades daily because of drivers who didn't like it. So I think we're going to see a resurgence of that this summer, from all the tables we're sitting at, from city reopening to regional reopening planning and other things. There's a lot of interest. I think there just needs to be a few improvements to make it more wide scale and sustainable. There's also there's been a lot of talk about public art and the role that public art plays in those, and making them places people want to go to, not just ride through. So we'll see. I think there's cool things on the horizon. And Maggie, I don't know if there's anything else about the survey that we want to share. Okay.
I was just going to add that, when something's new, right, again, kind of go back to human nature, people are initially either skeptical or against it. So sometimes you have to break down some of the will over time.
Yeah.
It also exposed some of our other street problems. There's streets that don't have safe crossings that the slow streets would run up against. And so I think it just points to thinking about things at a slightly higher level of where, not just on that block, but where do people want to get to and need to get to, and how can they get there safely? So I think it actually creates an opportunity for more safety and more changes that we need. We just need our departments of transportation on board in ways that help us activate it.
Let's see, and once we have survey results from the survey that Amy was just speaking about, we can share it with you if any lessons learned about slow streets or shared streets. Oh, and also actually Bike Walk Oak Park, I think it's tomorrow, they're speaking in the evening during this week, and they'll be talking about their shared street, slow street experience, which is one of the only examples I know in the suburbs in our region, though there were a lot of cafe streets around our region, but this actual slow streets idea pilot was implemented more wide scale in Oak Park. Let's see here. So Amy, question about fundraising. Does Active Trans have a date for Bike the Drive?
Mm-hmm. Stay tuned, but our plan right now is our hope to do it in the fall. We obviously need to follow the guidance of public health officials, and currently events of that size are not allowed. So we have a few different scenarios we're working on, and we've been working closely with the city to move the date later to increase the likelihood that it can happen. We want it to happen. People want to get out there and just have the feeling that you feel when you're on that smooth, long roadway in front of the lake with all those folks. So we're working on that. And I think as the vaccine rollout strengthens and our confidence grows, we'll have a little more clarity about our ability to do it. So, and to do it safely. So obviously we are, so much about cycling is about health and healthy communities. So we need to make sure that we have all of what we need in place for folks to be able to do it well and enjoy it. So.
And then Gina says, oh, she believes that the lobby day is $25. So that's good. Bennett asks, how have you tried to reach out to less frequent, less active cyclists?
I'll take that one, Amy. Just give you a minute to think about it. I think the way that Ride Illinois kind of is changing our approach, right? When you think about biking for transportation, there's probably an image that pops in your head, and it's not necessarily somebody all decked out on a fancy bike, right? So changing the perception of cycling is going to be key. Offering, the education and pushing our resources like the bike safety quiz, so folks feel a little more empowered when they hop on their bike. And then the infrastructure piece is always going to be key, and that is definitely a long-term challenge. But building the relationships is key. We have we call them affiliated bike clubs, and working with them to become more welcoming, to embrace what we call, the new or the returning cyclists, right? That kind of came out of nowhere with the bike boom. There has to be outreach to those folks. And so I think it's just in general with Ride Illinois, we're changing our approach a bit and that perception. And I do think that, becoming, more welcoming and and just kind of embracing those new folks is going to help. And you teach one person, they teach someone, and so on and so forth. All of a sudden it becomes a movement. So I don't know if there's no necessarily direct answer there, Bennett, but just promoting the benefits, working on the infrastructure, encouraging folks to give it a shot, and then being kind of present or available when they have questions or needs. That's how we're approaching it.
I'll just add, one of the things we did a year ago, almost a year ago in March, was work with bike shops and the governor's office to have bike shops be considered an essential business, because we foresaw this opportunity for an interest in more cycling. And so they were able to stay open throughout the different shutdowns we've had. And I've actually had 2 different meetings last week with bike shops, and they were overwhelmed in the best of ways. And I think supporting them and their ability to get bikes into people's hands of all income levels. So we have some really amazing community bike shop partners that we work with that are really getting bikes to people who haven't had bikes, parents and kids, and making sure that they have strong infrastructure in their communities to support safe cycling. So that's been special. We are also hosting, and Dave's also been helping with this, the Bicycle Film Fest, which just brings more views of the possibility of cycling to folks in ways that are really affirming and powerful and fun. So I encourage you all to check out that. It's starting next week, February 24th. Tickets are a sliding scale, but I think they start around $10. And I think that just shows the possibility of cycling in different ways, and any of us could be hosting folks to watch it, so or promoting it. So that's another way, I think, to just continue to broaden the fold of people who see the potential for active transportation in their life.
I just pasted a link to the Bicycle Film Fest. If you're curious about joining, I think it should be a fun event. And also, related to this topic, yesterday we heard from Cycle Brookfield and Elgin Community Bikes, and they both are very much about how to create a welcoming experience for everyone, how to get more people involved, and really thinking through who's missing from these experiences. And so I would, once we get these sessions online, I'd recommend checking out those 2 talks for their advice and ideas on how to get more people involved. Let's see, Ralph says, or I guess he's saying, I think safety is the main issue for infrequent cyclists. The safety program of Ride Illinois may be a good start. That and getting the word out. Too bad we can't do more through established channels like the school systems.
Yeah, schools are notoriously challenging, right? It's a packed school day, and now with many schools being remote, that's even more challenging. So we have, there's a bill that was passed, right, to teach education, but there's not much in the way of kind of teeth or enforcement behind it. So, that is an opportunity, always will be. We have a Ride Illinois has a mini grant program, which if it's fully, it's funded by IDOP. If we meet our goal this year, it's going to reach 45,000 students. It's not necessarily enough, but if we can reach 45,000, which is twice as many as last year, that's a step in the right direction. So we're not alone in this challenge by any means. When it comes to the infrequent cyclists, if you're part of a group, part of a club, maybe just out riding on your own, you see somebody doing something dangerous, say something friendly and, help them kind of learn, because education, no matter what age, is going to be key, and it's going to help to make the streets safer.
Bennett has a question. Thinking outside the box, where should public transportation departments invest money outside of improvements in trails and public streets?
If you were asking us this very day, we would say clean the bike lanes and sidewalks. It's just really hazardous. So that's streets and sand usually, or each community has it set up a little differently, and sometimes they're merged together. So yeah. So, another thing that we have been talking a lot about are speed limits. And there is such compelling data about the value of lower speed limits for safety. Even within an accident, even if there is an accident or a crash, your odds of being severely injured go down the lower the speed limit. So looking at how we build policy around our streets to make them safer, I think is really important, because you're right, building the complete streets design that is designed for safety and people does take a little longer. So I think there are other things that we can put in place so there's a full package of protection around safety. There are so many tentacles to safety that I think they're just really important. We have seen more people get severely injured or die in this past year, and that is just so deeply upsetting. And so I think there are different safety initiatives we can take on that go beyond large dollar investments, but those are also really important. Prioritizing people over cars is just not what they've done.
Yeah, and that's a decades long, right? And you've probably all read articles, right? You shouldn't have to own a car in order to live in a modern society. We posted a social media graphic, and it's something I ran across, where it was a situation like you explained, Amy, and there's a bike side path, which is great, along I-390, which is the Elgin O'Hare. And the through lane for the cars, clean as a whistle, right? Side path covered in snow. With a little help from Photoshop, we then posted the opposite and kind of said, well, imagine if, right? What if that were the priority? It's just, our culture is so car centric right now. It's going to take, and maybe we never get there. But I think if that's how we think, that just opens up some opportunities, and maybe we chip away over time. But we got to get people thinking, can I bike there? It's a phrase that comes up in my head often. And when I had to run an errand on Sunday in the midst of all the snow and everything, and I said, can I bike there? I said, sure. And I did, right? And it was fun and it was sloppy, but I did, right? So I think if that, can I bike there? Can I walk there? Can I get there by transit? If those are the questions that you ask yourself, and if any of those answers are yes, do it. By doing so, we're supporting transit and biking and walking.
Let's see, Ben asks, are there resources, data, initiatives around helping benefit organizations create cycling commuting benefits?
There is, people are working on this federally. So there's federal legislation on this. Actually, is that led by LAB, Dave? Do you know?
Yep.
So another reason to think about the lobby day that Dave mentioned. It is a new administration in DC, obviously, but in our work, the words active transportation are mentioned. It is really new. And so, talking to our members of Congress about valuing a bicycle commuter in the same way we value a car commuter or a train commuter, I think is really really important. So another pitch for Lobby Day.
Yeah. Thank you.
And then Bob asks, Amy and Dave, what do you see as the impact of increasing use of e-bikes in more dense areas?
You want to go first on that one, Amy?
So Divvy rolled out e-bikes in Chicago this past year, and people loved them. And I think back to the question about reaching out to people who haven't cycled in a while or at all. They are really an opportunity to get people riding with more confidence. And so Divvy just had this, I think it was this past August, they had the highest record number of riders they've ever had. And so I think making bike share available in that way really does reach some of those riders. So I should have answered that earlier. But we also saw a lot of interest in the e-bikes. We haven't built our infrastructure for all these modes well. So cyclists versus an e-bike versus scooter versus pedestrian, few cities have, but some cities in Europe are really thinking about these different types of active users. So I think there's a lot of potential in e-bikes. I think we just have to figure out a way to share the spaces and safely. But yeah, I think there's a lot more thinking and opportunity to think about there.
And when you think about an e-bike, which maybe not in February in Chicago, right? There might be a tough sell for someone, but in a lot of parts of the country could replace a car or a second car, right? Much cheaper. Hopefully there will be some incentives for rebates for e-bikes too. So going back to, again, when something is new, there's initial resistance to it. But Terry Witt's on this call. Terry's been talking about the benefits of e-bikes for years. And the tune has shifted from that's not a real bike, which, I don't agree with at all. But, when you think about a bike being a toy or just for recreation, that might be the mindset of someone. But when you think of it as now someone can get to work who, maybe wasn't physically able to ride the distance, but can do so on an e-bike, that's huge. And micromobility in general is going to be big, right? So there was a story on Strong Towns, which I think Terry also connected me with, about how when scooters, and it doesn't matter what the community was, but when dockless scooters were adopted for their community, all the residents complained about the fact that scooters were, locked up to various street signs or trees or what it might be, but didn't complain at all that up and down every street in their community was lined with cars. And that has stuck with me because, talk about something new and different. So, what if we had scooters and bikes locked up, but half the cars? Maybe I'm a dreamer, but I think that's how we have to think about things.
Question from Ralph. So there's two more questions, and then I think we'll wrap this up because you two have organizations to lead. So, so Ralph, or he does make a comment. So Ralph is he's a journalist for the Daily Herald, has a column along for the ride, but he says for a future column, he's hoping to write about county forest preserves, which prohibit motorized vehicles like e-bikes. So that's an interesting topic to explore.
Well, Cook County allows 2 of the 3 classes. There is one class which can, I think it's the class 2. Don't quote me on that, where it can go up to 28 miles an hour without pedal assist. Those are currently not allowed. But policy change is going to, it'll take time. And along with the forest reserves, one of the things we need to address is the fact that they're closed after dusk. So if we want biking and walking to be viable and equitable, we can't just allow bike commuters to be the 9-to-5ers. So sorry, I had to jump up on that do my little stump speech.
But Ralph's question is unrelated to that. He says, does Active Trans or Ride Illinois have involvement with CMAP, CMAP's planning group? They seem to be the group at the 30,000 foot level that set transportation priorities.
Yes. So we're on a few committees at CMAP, some standing committees, and then some more temporal committees. One right now is focused on safety and how do we not have a year again with so many deaths and injuries. So that's one thing that we're actively involved in right now. But the other is sort of mobility in our region as we emerge from this deeper part of our pandemic. And so I'm on that committee, and we'll be thinking through really much higher level transformed region that is, and they're being intentional about this, inclusive of pedestrians, cyclists, and transit. So I'm excited for that group. I think there is a lot of thinking we need to do, and a lot of stakeholders need to be involved with this. And we're also involved in very similar conversations at the city, but these are really regional conversations. The other thing I'll add, which I forgot to mention, but you are a ripe audience for, which is we did convince Metra, again with Ride Illinois, to get bikes on Metra in outside of the very restricted hours and routes that they had. So unfortunately, they launched it late last year, and so their pilot is running through the time when there are fewer people cycling. But you are, and your networks are really great opportunities to get people with bikes on Metra and riding out to some of those trails we were talking about in the Forest Preserve especially, which are just lovely.
Yeah, and that's a great example, Amy, where it's awesome to have that policy, and albeit it temporary right now. So we need people to take advantage of it to show Metra that there's interest, right? And just a quick other note on CMAP. So there's other MPOs or metropolitan planning organizations around the state. CMAP, based in the Chicagoland area, arguably the most progressive. But I also know that that they talk too. So if we can push the needle with CMAP, that could have a trickle down effect in some of these other kind of mid-sized cities around the state.
And also one thing to mention about CMAP, they get a lot of our federal money that goes to communities. So they decide how that money gets distributed. So I know both of our organizations have been working closely with CMAP, and we've been trying to push for, their projects that include walking and biking should be prioritized. And they have made some changes to their funding formula this year. And there's some funding opportunities out there right now. Surface Transportation Program funding, STP funding, CMAC funding is out there, congestion mitigation, air quality, and I think TAP, which is like all for bike lanes, bike projects, side paths. So there's a lot of funding out there that they control and prioritize what gets implemented and built. So yes, we're very much involved in trying to push things in the direction for more walking and biking and transit. So last question from Stephen. He says, how should we go about bringing attention to roads that recently had a road diet and installed bike infrastructure, especially in the face of local hostility towards increased traffic?
That's a tricky one. The idea or the the thought that there's increased hostility or slower speeds. I mean, there's data that goes into making these decisions. So a road diet isn't, you just don't choose a road kind of arbitrarily. It's based on, whether speed limit or average daily vehicles. So I guess I would argue that unless there's been a big change, that the road diet was implemented based on, kind of the historical usage of that road. Now, you're never going to make everybody happy. There's always going to be folks who want to go a mile an hour faster or, feel like they're inconvenienced. But I guess my short answer to that is, maybe we'll deal with some of the folks who are not happy about it, but there was a reason that road diet was implemented.
Yeah, and I think some of that gets back to the sort of bird's eye view of the users. And so we hear so much from the drivers on those streets, and a lot less from the businesses and the cyclists and pedestrians. So some of the ones that I've been on more recently, some of the newer designs really do make it so much safer to cross that street, not just ride on it, but for a pedestrian. And so I think it would be interesting to just have people out experiencing the street or do some GoPro video of the experience and compare that to some other roads. Because I also take a road to one of the forest preserves if I head over there that is not safe. And it could be a 1-lane road, and it could have a bike lane, and it could have a sidewalk, and it doesn't. And those two experiences in one day are really shocking. So I don't know. We have a long way to go on this. A long way. Oh, we lost your audio, Maggie.
Oh, thanks. Sorry.
Oh, there you are.
Myself muted.
Okay.
Well, I think we'll wrap up. But do you, Amy and Dave, do you have any closing words? Anything you want to share with those who are here today before we say goodbye for now?
Yeah, none of this work happens just because of us. It is really you all in your communities, because you see what you need and you see the experiences and you have the power with your local elected officials. So I'm so glad you actually spent your morning with us. This was fun. I think there's a lot more we could have gone deeper on if we had more time. We were only supposed to be here for 15 minutes. So we might get in trouble later with Maggie, we'll see. But I just think, keep at it. And we both have so many resources to help support you. So don't ever hesitate to reach out. I'm speaking for both of us, Dave. If you need support or information or help, because we have a lot of information and a lot of ways to help you.
Yeah, and if we can, I agree, Amy, thank you for that. If we can kind of point you in the right direction or make a connection, help a conversation happen, let's look for some small wins while we keep our eyes on on long-term change. So send an email, give us a call. Happy to have a conversation and help you in your community.
Well, thank you both so much. It was a really great conversation. And thank you all for joining and all your questions. So yeah, appreciate it and hope to see you the rest of the day. We've got lots of county updates, DuPage, McHenry Lake, and then the East Branch DuPage River Trail this evening. They've done a lot of amazing work, getting a lot of people involved in their advocacy efforts. So hope you can join us. But thank you, Amy and Dave, and we'll talk to you all later.
Thank you, Maggie. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.